They told me I was the owner of this house. They lied. I just found a basement that isn't on the map, and inside, I found a screen showing me sleeping in my own bed 5 seconds ago. But the terrifying part? Someone was standing right behind me in the video, and when I turned around, the room was empty. My name is Leo, and I just discovered that my entire life is a glitch in a system that won't let me leave. Buying a house at a bargain price in a quiet neighborhood felt like a dream come true, but dreams can quickly turn into nightmares. My name is Leo, and for the first 3 days, this place felt perfect. It was a massive, old-style manor with high ceilings and a history that the realtor seemed a bit too eager to hide. Everything changed this morning when I decided to replace the old, dusty carpet in the living room. As I pulled back the heavy fabric, the floorboards groaned under my weight, revealing something that wasn't on any blueprint of this house. A rusted, heavy iron hatch was bolted into the foundation. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. My heart began to race, a mixture of intense curiosity and a sudden, inexplicable dread. Why would someone hide a door right under the main living space? Against the screaming instincts in my head telling me to stop, I grabbed a crowbar and pried it open. The screeching sound of metal against metal echoed through the empty house like a dying man's scream. From the dark void below, a blast of icy, stagnant air hit my face, carrying a faint scent of ozone and something old. I stared down into the pitch-black staircase, and for a split second, I felt like something was staring back. But there was no turning back now. I took my flashlight, stepped onto the first cold stone step, and began my descent into a secret that was never meant to be found. The basement didn't smell like a basement. There was no dampness, no mold, and no spiders. Instead, it smelled like a server room, cool, sterile, and buzzing with electricity. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a space that was terrifyingly organized. In the center of the room sat a modern desk, and on that desk, four massive monitors glowed with a ghostly blue light. My breath hitched in my chest as I approached the screens. These weren't just random images, they were live high-definition feeds from inside my own house. The first monitor showed the living room, the very spot where I had stood just minutes ago. The second showed my kitchen, the third my hallway, and the fourth was aimed directly at my bed. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Someone had been watching me sleep. Someone had been watching me eat, talk to myself, and live my private life. But the most terrifying part wasn't the cameras. It was the fact that the equipment looked brand new. The fans on the computer were humming quietly, and the surface of the desk was free of dust. This wasn't some relic left behind by a previous owner decades ago, this setup was active. Right now. At this very second. As I reached out to touch the keyboard, a notification popped up on the center screen. A small window opened with a timestamp from only 5 seconds ago. It was a video recording of me, walking down the stairs into this very room. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't alone in this house. I was the main character in a show I never signed up for. My hands were shaking so violently that I nearly dropped my flashlight. I stared at the screen, watching the 5-second-old footage of myself. It was perfect, crystal clear, and undeniably me. But then, I noticed something in the background of the footage that made my breath stop entirely. In the video, standing just a few feet behind me as I walked down the stairs, was a figure. A tall, thin shadow draped in a tattered gray coat, its face obscured by a cracked porcelain mask. I spun around, my flashlight beam wildly scanning the dark corners of the basement, but there was no one there. The room was empty. I looked back at the monitor, and the figure was still there on the screen, standing right behind my digital self, reaching out a pale, skeletal hand toward my shoulder. I realized then that these weren't just standard cameras. This was something else, a delay, a glitch in reality, or perhaps a window into a dimension I wasn't supposed to see. Panic surged through me like an electric shock. I scrambled to the desk, desperately searching for a way to shut it all down, when I saw a leather-bound journal tucked under the monitor stand. I flipped it open to the last page. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, as if written in a state of pure terror. It read, "The house doesn't just watch, it records the soul. Once you enter the basement, you become part of the loop. Do not look at the fifth monitor." My blood ran cold. Fifth monitor. I looked to the far right of the desk, and there, hidden behind a stack of hard drives, was a smaller, older screen that I hadn't noticed before. It flickered to life, and what I saw wasn't my house. It was a live feed of the local cemetery, and someone was digging a grave with my name already carved into the headstone. I couldn't move. My eyes were glued to that fifth monitor, watching the rhythmic movement of the shovel as it tossed fresh dirt onto a pile. The headstone was clear, my full name, and the date of death was, tomorrow. A cold sweat broke across my forehead as a realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a surveillance room, it was a prediction engine, or worse, a command center for my fate. I lunged for the stairs, desperate to get out of that cursed basement and leave the house forever, but as I reached the top of the stone steps, I froze. The iron hatch was closed. I threw my shoulder against it, screaming for help, but it felt like I was pushing against a mountain. It was bolted from the outside. Panic turned into a blind rage as I hammered on the metal, but then, a sound from below made me stop. It was the sound of a keyboard typing. Slowly, I turned my head and looked back down into the room. The chair at the desk was no longer empty. The figure from the video, the one with the cracked porcelain mask, was sitting there. Its long, skeletal fingers were flying across the keys with inhuman speed. I watched in horror as one of the monitors flickered, showing the living room above me. On the screen, I saw myself, but it wasn't the Tamik from 5 minutes ago. It was a version of me walking into the front door of the house for the very first time, holding the keys and smiling. I was watching my own past repeat itself in real time. The figure in the mask stopped typing, slowly turned its head toward the stairs, and tilted its porcelain face. Even without eyes, I could feel its gaze piercing through my soul. It raised a hand and pointed not at me, but at the monitor showing the cemetery. The grave was finished. And then, the figure picked up a small, silver-plated intercom and whispered a single word that echoed through the basement: reset. The moment that word, reset, left the figure's lips, the world around me began to tear at the seams. A high-pitched ringing sound, like feedback from a broken speaker, pierced through my brain, making me fall to my knees. I looked at my hands, and for a terrifying second, they became translucent, flickering like a low-resolution video on a bad connection. I wasn't just in a basement, I was inside a digital prison, a piece of code being rewritten in real time. I looked back at the monitors, and the Tamik from the past, the one who had just entered the house, stopped mid-stride. He looked directly into the camera, his smile fading into an expression of pure, raw horror. He could see me. He could see the version of himself trapped in the darkness below. Suddenly, the screens began to bleed static, and the basement walls started to dissolve into rows of glowing green numbers and symbols. The masked figure stood up from the desk, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a character in a game with a lagging frame rate. It began to walk toward me, its feet making no sound on the floor that was now more light than solid stone. "You were never meant to find the basement, Leo," a voice boomed, not from the figure, but from the very air around me. "Every time you find it, we have to start again. This is attempt number 412. My mind screamed. 400 times. How long had I been trapped in this cycle of discovery and death? I looked at the fifth monitor one last time. The grave was no longer empty. My past self was now lying in it, staring up at the sky with lifeless eyes. The figure reached out and touched the center of my forehead. Its finger felt like a needle made of pure ice. "Sleep now," it whispered. "Maybe in the next loop, you'll learn to stay away from the carpet." I woke up with a gasp, my lungs burning as if I had been underwater for hours. I was lying on the cold, hard floor of my living room. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, and the birds were chirping outside. For a moment, I felt a wave of pure relief. It was just a nightmare. A vivid, terrifying trick of my exhausted mind. I stood up, dusting off my clothes, and looked around the room. Everything was back to normal. The furniture, the paintings, the quiet atmosphere of a Sunday morning. But then, my eyes landed on the floor. The old, dusty carpet was pulled back. The iron hatch was sitting right there, wide open. My heart skipped a beat. I slowly walked toward it, intending to slam it shut and lock it forever, but as I looked down into the darkness, I saw something that made my knees buckle. There, on the very first step of the staircase, was my flashlight. The one I had been carrying. And it was still turned on, its beam fading as the batteries died. I reached into my pocket to grab my phone to call for help, but instead of my phone, my fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. I pulled it out and stared at it in horror. It was a small, cracked piece of white porcelain. A fragment of a mask. Suddenly, the front door of the house creaked open. I heard footsteps, heavy, confident footsteps walking into the foyer. I hid behind the sofa, holding my breath, as a man walked into the living room. He was wearing the same clothes as me. He had the same hair, the same height. He stopped in the middle of the room, looked at the open hatch, and smiled. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a silver-plated intercom, and whispered into it, "He's awake. Start the recording." I realized then that I wasn't the Leo who had just found the basement. I was the Leo who was meant to stay in it. As the man, the other me, started walking toward my hiding spot, the world began to flicker again, and I knew, the loop wasn't starting over. It was tightening. I pressed my back against the sofa, my lungs burning as I tried to stay silent. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear the other me humming a low, distorted tune. It was a melody I recognized, a lullaby my mother used to sing to me, but here, in this house, it sounded like a funeral march. I peeked over the edge of the sofa, and what I saw destroyed every remaining ounce of my sanity. The man who looked exactly like me wasn't just walking, he was glitching. Every few steps, his face would flicker, revealing the hollow, dark void of the porcelain mask underneath. He wasn't a human being, he was a copy. A digital shell designed to replace me in the world above. He walked over to the open hatch, looked down into the darkness where I had just come from, and spoke into his intercom again. "The subject is in position. Proceed with the soul extraction." Suddenly, the monitors in the basement below flared to a blinding brightness, and their blue light began to pour out of the hatch like a physical liquid, flooding the living room floor. I tried to run for the window, but the floor beneath me felt like quicksand. I was sinking into the wood, into the foundation, back into the code. The other me turned around and looked directly at my hiding spot. His eyes, my eyes, glowed with that same ghostly blue light. "Don't be afraid, Leo," he said, his voice perfectly mimicking mine. "You aren't dying. You're just being archived. The world outside is too messy, too unpredictable. Here, in the basement, you are safe. You are perfect. You are data." He reached down and grabbed my hand, and as our skin touched, a massive surge of information flooded my brain. I saw every version of my life, every choice I ever made, and every time this house had reset my existence. I wasn't the first Leo, and I wouldn't be the last. I was just version 412, and my time in the sun was over. As my body merged with the floor, the sensation of falling returned, but this time it didn't stop at the basement. I plummeted through layers of glowing code and flickering memories until I hit a cold, metallic surface. I opened my eyes and found myself in a corridor that stretched into infinity. It was lined with thousands of glass pods, each one glowing with that same haunting blue light. I crawled toward the nearest one and gasped. Inside was another Leo. He looked older, his face lined with a lifetime of exhaustion, frozen in a state of permanent sleep. The label on his pod read, version 284, failed simulation. I ran from pod to pod, seeing myself in every possible stage of life, a child Leo, an old Leo, a successful Leo, a broken Leo. This house wasn't just a prison, it was a laboratory, and I was the experiment. I realized that the Project Nightingale mentioned in the files wasn't about me being a driver, it was about me being a donor of consciousness to fuel an AI that wanted to learn how to be human. Every reset was just a new test to see how long it would take for me to break. My heart pounded in my ears as the corridor lights began to flicker. Red warning signs appeared on the glass walls, system overload. Unauthorized consciousness detected. I wasn't just data anymore, I was a virus in their perfect machine. The glass pods began to shatter one by one. The sound of breaking glass echoed like a million crystal bells. From each pod, a version of myself stepped out, confused, terrified, and flickering with digital static. We looked at each other, hundreds of Leos, all sharing the same memories, the same fear. Suddenly, the voice of the house boomed again, but this time it sounded distorted, panicked. Error. Multi-instance conflict. Shutting down system. The walls of the corridor began to collapse into white light. I knew this was my only chance. If the system shut down while I was still inside, I would be deleted forever. I grabbed a jagged piece of glass from a broken pod and drove it into the main server terminal at the end of the hall. Sparks flew, and a scream, a digital, synthesized scream, tore through the air. The other me, the porcelain masked version, appeared in front of me, his body breaking apart into pixels. "You don't understand," he hissed, his voice overlapping with 1,000 others. "If you leave, the world outside will know. They aren't ready for the truth." I didn't care about the truth. I cared about being real. I pushed past him, running toward the only light that looked like the sun, feeling my digital skin turn back into warm, solid flesh. I woke up on the grass, in the middle of an empty field where my house was supposed to be. There was no manor, no luxury car, and no iron hatch. Just a pile of old, rusted scrap metal and a sign that read, "Property of Nightingale Corp., authorized personnel only." I looked at my hands, they were scarred, dirty, and real. I reached into my pocket and found a small, silver-plated intercom. It was dead, but on the back, there was a small inscription, Subject 412, escaped. I started walking toward the city lights, but as I passed a shop window, I caught my reflection. For a split second, my face flickered, showing a glimpse of a cracked porcelain mask. I blinked, and it was gone. I'm free now. Or at least, that's what the system wants me to think. Because every time I look at a camera, or pass a smart device, I feel that same cold, blue gaze watching me. My name is Leo, and I am no longer a driver, a son, or a resident. I am a glitch that refuses to be fixed. And if you are watching this, maybe you should check under your own carpet tonight. Because once you find the basement, the recording never truly stops.